A dog refused to eat until his owner checked the backyard. What he found was terrifying. At first, it looked like nothing more than a strange shimmer on the grass. But the dog wouldn't stop staring, wouldn't stop growling. And when the owner followed the trail, he uncovered something hidden beneath his own home. Something dangerous, something that powerful men never wanted him to see. Soon, he wasn't just fighting for his dog's life, he was fighting to protect everything he owned, and even to survive. But the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about poison in the ground. It was about a secret designed to destroy him. What was buried beneath that backyard? And why did someone want it hidden so badly that they were willing to kill for it? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn evening settled over Thad Merrick's modest home, like a well-worn blanket, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of his daily routine. The kitchen's warm yellow light spilled across worn linoleum as he prepared Hobbs's dinner, the metal food bowl scraping against the floor as he set it down. The rescue hound had never missed a meal in the 3 years since Thad had brought him home from the shelter. "Here you go, boy," Thad said, running a hand over Hobbs's rough coat. The large dog's amber eyes, usually bright with anticipation at dinner time, were fixed on something beyond the kitchen's back door. Instead of diving into his food as usual, Hobbs stood completely still, his muscles tense beneath Thad's fingers. "What's wrong, buddy?" Thad knelt beside his companion, concern creeping into his voice. Hobbs's food bowl sat untouched, steam rising from the mixture of kibble and warm broth that Thad always prepared for him. The dog's nose twitched, and a low whine escaped his throat. To Thad's surprise, Hobbs used his snout to push the bowl across the floor, inch by inch towards the back door. The scraping sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet kitchen. The dog's behavior sent a chill down Thad's spine. In all their time together, he had never seen Hobbs act this way. "You trying to tell me something?" Thad stood up slowly, his eyes following Hobbs's intent gaze through the window. The backyard was dimly lit by the security light mounted under the eaves, casting long shadows across the familiar landscape. Nothing seemed immediately out of place, but Hobbs's tension was contagious. The dog's deep bark startled Thad, echoing through the kitchen. Hobbs pawed at the door, his nails clicking against the wood with increasing urgency. Okay, Thad said, reaching for the doorknob. "Let's check it out." The evening air hit his face with unexpected coldness as he stepped onto the back porch. Hobbs bounded down the steps ahead of him, making a beeline for the far corner of the yard where an old wooden fence marked the property line. The security light cast enough illumination for Thad to follow, though shadows played tricks with his depth perception. As he approached the fence, something about the grass caught his attention. The beam of his phone's flashlight revealed an odd sheen across the blades, like someone had spilled oil in a wide arc. "What the hell?" he muttered, crouching down for a closer look. The substance wasn't quite liquid, more like a film that made the grass appear slick and unnatural. Hobbs stood at attention near an old culvert that ran beneath the fence, his hackles raised. The drainage pipe had been there since before Thad inherited the house from his mother, largely forgotten beneath overgrown weeds. Now, though, there was something distinctly wrong about it. Thad moved closer, the beam of his flashlight revealing that the weeds around the culvert's opening had withered, their usual green turned to a sickly brown. More of the oily substance seemed to be seeping from the pipe's mouth, but what really made him step back was the temperature change. A draft of air so cold it made his eyes water rose from the culvert, completely at odds with the mild autumn evening. "Easy, Hobbs," Thad said, more to steady himself than calm the dog. He reached out tentatively toward the pipe, and the cold intensified. It wasn't just cool air. This was an unnatural chill that seemed to reach right through his skin and settle in his bones. His fingers began to ache, and he quickly pulled them back. The security light flickered overhead, casting unstable shadows that seemed to writhe across the contaminated grass. Hobbs's low growl was continuous now, a rumbling warning that made the hair on the back of Thad's neck stand up. Whatever was seeping onto his property, it wasn't natural, and it wasn't safe. Taking a few steps back, Thad surveyed the extent of the contamination. The oily sheen had spread in a rough semicircle from the culvert, covering maybe 15 feet of his yard. He couldn't tell how long it had been there, but Hobbs's behavior suggested this was a recent development. The dog had always been sensitive to changes in their environment, his instincts sharper than any security system. "Good boy," Thad said softly, patting Hobbs's head. "You did good showing me this." The dog's ears remained alert, his eyes never leaving the culvert. The cold draft continued to pour out, creating a visible distortion in the air, like heat waves in reverse. Thad's mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. The culvert was supposed to be for rainwater drainage, but this substance was clearly something else entirely. He thought about calling the city's public works department, but one look at his phone showed it was well past office hours. Besides, something told him this wasn't a simple municipal issue. The security light flickered again, longer this time, and in that moment of darkness, Thad could have sworn he saw something move within the culvert. Not water, not animals, but something that seemed to pull the shadows around it like a cloak. When the light stabilized, there was nothing visible except the oily sheen and the withered plants. Hobbs's bark shattered the evening quiet again, this time with a note of urgency that Thad had never heard before. The dog began backing away from the culvert, pressing against Thad's legs as if trying to herd him back toward the house. Despite his size and usual fearlessness, something about this situation had Hobbs thoroughly spooked. "Okay, buddy," Thad said, taking the hint. "Let's head inside and figure this out." He kept his eyes on the culvert as they retreated, watching as another wave of cold air seemed to pulse from its depths, killing more grass on contact. The security light dimmed once more, and this time Thad could feel the electricity in the air change, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Back in the kitchen, Thad closed and locked the door, drawing the curtains for good measure. Hobbs stationed himself in front of the door, his body rigid with alertness. The dog's food bowl remained untouched where he had pushed it, a silent testament to how wrong things had become. Thad's own appetite had vanished, replaced by a gnawing worry that settled in his stomach like lead. He'd lived in this house his entire life, inherited it from his mother, along with all its quirks and history, but nothing like this had ever happened before. The cold from the culvert seemed to have followed him inside, lingering on his skin despite the kitchen's warmth. Pulling out his phone again, Thad began documenting what he'd seen, taking notes and photos of the strange substance visible through the window. He wasn't sure who he would show them to, but something told him he needed to keep a record. Whatever was seeping onto his property was more than a simple drainage problem or chemical spill. Hobbs's whine drew his attention back to the window. The security light was flickering more frequently now, and in the strobe-like effect, the oily sheen seemed to be spreading, creeping inch by inch across his yard, like some kind of living thing. The cold draft had intensified enough that frost was beginning to form on the outside of the window, despite the autumn temperature. "What are we dealing with here, boy?" Thad muttered, reaching down to scratch behind Hobbs's ears. The dog leaned into his touch but maintained his vigilant stance, a low growl rumbling in his chest whenever the light flickered. The evening that had started with a simple refused meal had transformed into something out of a nightmare, and Thad had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. He watched as another patch of grass withered and died, the unnatural substance claiming more of his yard with each passing minute. The cold draft from the culvert had become visible now, a pale mist that hugged the ground and seemed to move with purpose. Whatever was happening, Hobbs had sensed it. First, his refusal to eat serving as the first warning of the terror that was literally seeping into their lives. The security light gave one final, prolonged flicker before stabilizing, casting harsh shadows across the contaminated yard. In the restored brightness, Thad could see the full extent of the damage. A growing patch of dead grass, crystalline frost formations where none should exist, and at the center of it all, the culvert, now seeming more like a gateway than a simple drainage pipe. Hobbs pressed closer to Thad's side, his body trembling slightly but his stance unwavering. Together they stood watch at the kitchen window, two sentinels facing an unknown threat that had chosen their backyard as its point of entry into their world. The evening meal lay forgotten, Hobbs's intuition having led them to a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about their quiet corner of the world. The county building loomed ahead, its gray concrete walls matching the overcast morning sky. Thad clutched his phone, filled with photos of the strange residue, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he made his way to the code enforcement office, his work boots squeaking against the polished floor. Inside, Director Clive Dorn's office was as cold as his reception. The man barely looked up from his computer screen, his thin fingers tapping away at the keyboard. "Yes?" he drawled, his voice carrying the bored tone of someone who had already decided this was a waste of his time. "Sir, I need to report a chemical spill or some kind of contamination on my property," Thad said, stepping forward. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through the photos. "There's this oily substance coming up through the culvert, and it's killing everything it touches." Dorn's eyes flickered briefly to the phone before returning to his screen. "Have any of your neighbors been fertilizing recently?" "This isn't fertilizer," Thad insisted, his voice firm. "It's got this weird sheen to it, and there's this cold air coming up from underground. My dog won't even go near it." Finally, Dorn turned away from his computer, though his expression remained uninterested. "Mr. Merrick, is it? Look, we get calls about runoff all the time. People over-fertilize their lawns, it rains, and suddenly everyone's crying chemical spill. But my drinking water tastes different too, kind of metallic," Thad added, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Something's not right. Dorn's thin lips curved into what might have been meant as a reassuring smile, but came across as condescending. "Spring water often has mineral content that can affect the taste. It's perfectly normal." He turned back to his computer, clearly dismissing Thad's concerns. "File a complaint if you want, but I can tell you right now it's nothing to worry about." Thad stood there for a moment longer, his jaw clenched. The photos on his phone showed clear evidence of something unnatural, but Dorn wasn't even willing to look at them. "Thank you for your time," he managed to say, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. The drive home was a blur of anger and worry. Thad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he pulled into his driveway. He was so distracted that he almost missed it at first, the way his gate swung too freely when he pushed it open. Then he saw the clean cut through the metal latch, the sharp edges still gleaming where the bolt cutters had sliced through. His heart began to pound as he approached the gate more carefully. There, tucked into the chain-link fence, was a piece of paper. The message was typed in plain black letters. "Mind your own yard." Thad's hands shook as he pulled the note free. Someone had been here while he was gone. Someone wanted him to back off. The abstract threat of the mysterious substance in his yard had suddenly become very real and very human. He pulled out his phone to take pictures of the cut latch and the note, documenting everything just as he had with the residue. This time, though, he wasn't sure who he could trust with the information. Clearly, someone had connections enough to know he'd gone to code enforcement and had acted quickly to warn him off. Inside, Hobbs greeted him with unusual intensity, pressing against his legs and whining softly. Thad checked his water bowl, full but untouched, just like his food had been the night before. He filled a glass from the tap and took a sip, grimacing at the metallic taste that seemed even stronger than before. The afternoon dragged into evening, with Thad alternating between watching his backyard through the windows and trying to figure out his next move. He'd installed a new padlock on the gate, but it felt like an empty gesture. Whoever had left the note could just as easily cut through this lock, too. As night fell, Hobbs's behavior became more agitated. The dog paced between the back door and the kitchen windows, his nails clicking against the linoleum. Every few minutes, he would stop and stare intently into the darkness, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Around 10 o'clock, movement in the alley caught Thad's attention. Hobbs was instantly alert, his growl deepening as shadows shifted beyond the fence. Thad killed the kitchen lights to see better, pressing close to the window. He could make out what looked like two figures moving past his property, their shapes indistinct in the darkness. Hobbs's growl turned into a series of sharp barks, and the figures quickly disappeared. Thad's heart was racing as he turned the lights back on and double-checked all his locks. The night seemed to press in around the house, full of hidden threats and unspoken warnings. He pulled out his phone again, looking at the photos he'd taken. The cut latch, the threatening note, the strange residue that was still spreading across his yard. It all pointed to something bigger than a simple drainage issue. Someone was deliberately trying to intimidate him, to keep him from asking questions about whatever was seeping onto his property. In the kitchen, he ran the tap again, filling a glass and holding it up to the light. The water looked clear enough, but that metallic taste was unmistakable now. He thought about Hobbs refusing to drink from his bowl and felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just his property at stake anymore. His dog's life could be in danger too. Thad set the glass down untouched and looked at Hobbs, who had taken up his guard position by the back door again. The dog's usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by a tense vigilance, his muscles coiled and ready for action. They were both on edge now, knowing that somewhere out in the darkness someone was watching, waiting to see if their warning would be heeded. The security light in the backyard flickered, casting jumping shadows across the dead patches of grass. The oily substance seemed to gleam with an unnatural sheen, and the cold draft from the culvert was visible now as a low-lying mist. Thad stood at the window with Hobbs, both of them silent sentinels against whatever threat lurked beyond their fence. The simple life they had known was slipping away, replaced by something darker and more dangerous with each passing hour. The digital clock on Thad's microwave read 2:37 in the morning as he sat in his darkened kitchen, a cup of cold coffee forgotten on the table beside him. Hobbs lay alert at his feet, ears pricked forward toward the back door. They had been keeping this vigil for 3 nights now, waiting and watching. Tonight felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, and Hobbs's occasional low growls told Thad his instincts were right. Someone would come. At 3:15, the first rumble of engines broke the pre-dawn silence. Thad's hand tightened around his phone as he crouched lower in the shadows. Hobbs rose silently beside him, his body tense. 2 unmarked trucks, their headlights off, crept down the alley behind his property. They were large industrial vehicles, the kind used for hauling waste, but stripped of any identifying logos or markings. In the dim glow of the security light, Thad could make out their dull gray paint jobs. He started recording as the first truck backed up toward the culvert that ran beneath his fence. The driver was skilled, positioning the vehicle with practiced precision. 2 men jumped down from the cab, their movements quick and efficient. They wore dark clothes and work boots, but no uniforms or safety gear. The back of the truck opened with a metallic groan. Inside, Thad could see rows of barrels. His phone captured everything as the men began unloading them, rolling them down a makeshift ramp toward the culvert. In the weak light, he could just make out labels on the sides. Organic soil enhancer. But these weren't any garden supply deliveries. The men handled the barrels with the careful attention reserved for dangerous materials, and the way they kept looking over their shoulders spoke of guilt, not routine work. Thad zoomed in as much as his phone would allow, trying to capture clear images of the men's faces and any identifying details on the trucks. His hands were steady despite his pounding heart. This was the evidence he needed. The operation took less than 20 minutes. 8 barrels disappeared into the culvert, and the trucks pulled away as silently as they had arrived. Thad kept recording until they were gone, then slumped against the wall, adrenaline still coursing through his system. Hobbs pressed against his leg, offering silent support. Thad scratched behind his ears, mind racing. He had proof now, but who could he trust with it? Not code enforcement. Dorn had made his position clear. He needed someone else, someone who might have seen the effects of whatever was being dumped. As morning light began to creep over the horizon, Thad remembered conversations overheard at the grocery store where he worked nights. Local paramedics had been responding to an unusual number of calls lately: respiratory problems, skin irritations, unexplained illness. One name kept coming up: Lark Mendel. He waited until 8 o'clock before heading to the fire station where the paramedics were based. Hobbs rode shotgun, still unwilling to drink from his water bowl at home. The morning shift was just starting when Thad pulled into the parking lot. Inside, he asked for Lark Mendel and was directed to the break room. He found her filling out paperwork at a table, empty coffee cups suggesting she'd just finished a long shift. She looked up as he approached, gray-green eyes sharp despite her obvious fatigue. "Can I help you?" she asked, setting down her pen. Thad hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I hope so. I've got something you need to see." He played the video, watching her expression change from polite interest to focused concern. When it finished, she leaned back, running a hand through her short hair. "When was this taken?" "About 4 hours ago," Thad replied. "Behind my property on Cedar Grove Road. There's a culvert that runs under my fence. They've been dumping something there for weeks now. My dog won't drink the water anymore, and everything's dying." Lark nodded slowly. "We've had calls from that area. Respiratory issues, rashes, chronic headaches. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but consistent patterns." She studied him carefully. "Have you reported this?" "Tried. Clive Dorn at Code Enforcement brushed me off. Said it was fertilizer runoff." Thad's frustration crept into his voice. "Then someone cut my gate latch and left a warning note." "Classic Dorn," Lark muttered. "He's been ignoring complaints for years." She glanced at the clock, then back at Thad. "I get off in 10 minutes. Want to show me your property?" Relief flooded through him. Finally, someone was listening. "Yes, please." They met at his house 30 minutes later. Lark had changed into civilian clothes but carried herself with the same professional authority. She examined the culvert first, then the spreading dead zones in his yard. The morning sun revealed the oily sheen more clearly than ever. "This is industrial waste," she said, crouching to examine the soil. "Probably from Pike Haulage. They're the only outfit around here with trucks that size, though they usually have their logo plastered all over them." "Pike Haulage?" "Everett Pike's company. He's got contracts all over the county, but there have been rumors about illegal dumping for years." Lark stood, brushing off her hands. "Nothing ever sticks to him, though. He's got friends in high places." "Like Clive Dorn?" "Exactly like Clive Dorn." She pulled out her phone and took several pictures. "But this time we have video evidence, and I've been keeping records of every suspicious call we've responded to in this area." Thad watched her work, hope building for the first time in weeks. "So you'll help?" Lark met his eyes. "Yes. This has gone on long enough. People are getting sick, and no one's doing anything about it." She gestured toward his house. "Got any coffee? We need to make a plan." They spent the next hour at Thad's kitchen table, Hobbs lying between them as they compared notes. Lark's medical knowledge added crucial context to what Thad had observed. The symptoms she'd been treating matched known effects of industrial chemical exposure. "The problem is proving it conclusively," she explained. "Pike's smart. He uses shell companies, pays off officials, keeps everything just legal enough on paper. We need more than just one video." "I can keep watching," Thad offered. "Document every dump." Lark nodded. "Good. I'll pull my call records, start mapping out the pattern of illnesses, and I know some people at the Environmental Protection Agency who might be interested." She paused, expression serious. "But be careful. Pike doesn't play nice with whistleblowers." "I've noticed," Thad said dryly, thinking of the cut lock and threatening note. "I mean it," Lark insisted. "Don't confront them directly. Document everything, but stay safe. We'll build the case properly." Looking at her determined expression, Thad felt something shift inside him. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Whatever came next, he had an ally who understood both the danger and the importance of what they were doing. Hobbs moved to put his head in Lark's lap, and she smiled, scratching his ears. "Smart dog you've got here. He knew something was wrong before anyone else." "He's the reason I noticed in the first place," Thad admitted. "Wouldn't eat his food that night." Animals often sense trouble before we do. Lark gave Hobbs a final pat and stood. "I need to get some sleep, but I'll start making calls tomorrow. Keep your phone handy, and maybe invest in some security cameras." Thad walked her to the door, watching as she got into her car. For the first time since this had all started, he felt like he was doing more than just reacting to threats. They had a plan now, and more importantly, they had evidence. Back inside, he reviewed the video again, making sure it was safely backed up to cloud storage. The image quality was good enough to clearly show the trucks, the barrels, and the culvert. Combined with Lark's medical records, it was a solid start. Hobbs settled at his feet, more relaxed than he'd been in days. Outside, the morning sun highlighted the damage to his yard, but Thad looked at it with new determination. Someone would be held accountable for this. He and Lark would make sure of it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Thad's backyard as he and Lark spread out a wrinkled county planning map on his patio table. Hobbs lay nearby, alert but relaxed, occasionally lifting his head to watch them work. "These drainage maps are from 1985, Lark said, tracing a blue line with her finger. "But the basic layout shouldn't have changed much. The main culvert system follows the natural watershed." Thad leaned in closer, studying the faded lines. "That's my property there," he pointed. "And this is where I've been seeing the trucks." Lark nodded, pulling out a highlighter. "The culvert branches here," she marked the spot, "and runs northeast toward—" She paused, her eyes widening slightly. Well, that's interesting. What is it? This section borders Pike's land. There's an old orchard shed marked here that used to belong to the Miller family before Pike bought them out. She tapped the map. Perfect cover for accessing the culvert system without being seen from the main road. Thad felt his heart rate quicken. We need to see it. Agreed. But we should be careful. Pike's property is heavily posted with no trespassing signs, and he's known to prosecute. Lark folded the map carefully. Let's follow the public access route first. They took Lark's truck, parking it at the end of an old maintenance road. The late afternoon heat pressed down on them as they walked, following the subtle depression in the ground that marked the culvert's path. Thad carried a backpack with water bottles and basic tools, while Lark documented their route with her phone's GPS. After 20 minutes of walking, they spotted the shed through the trees. It was a weathered structure, its red paint long faded to a dull rust color. Though abandoned, the area around it was suspiciously clear of undergrowth. "Look at the tire tracks," Thad whispered, pointing to fresh marks in the dirt. "They're recent." Lark took several photos, being careful to stay on the public right-of-way. "And there's our connection." She indicated where the culvert emerged from the ground near the shed's foundation. "They're using this point to dump into the system, and gravity carries it down to your property." They worked their way back downstream, marking access, points, and taking photos. When they reached Thad's property, Lark pulled a small drone from her backpack. "This will give us a better view of the whole system," she explained, launching the device. The drone's camera revealed what they couldn't see from ground level, a clear pattern of stressed vegetation following the culvert's path. "We need to stop them from using my end of the culvert," Thad said as they reviewed the footage. "At least slow them down while we gather more evidence." Lark agreed. "I brought some materials." She opened her truck's toolbox, revealing metal grating and posts. "It won't stop them completely, but it'll make it harder, and maybe force them to leave more obvious traces." They spent the next hour installing the makeshift grate where the culvert entered Thad's property. It was hot, dirty work, but when they finished, the barrier looked solid enough to prevent any large-scale dumping. "Now for the official channels," Lark said, handing Thad a bottle of water. "There's a state environmental hotline. They're required to investigate reports of illegal dumping." Thad called immediately, navigating through several automated menus before reaching a human operator. He provided detailed information about the dumping, the culvert system, and his documentation. The operator took his information politely, but without any sense of urgency. "We'll open an investigation," she said. "Please allow 15 to 20 business days for initial review." After hanging up, Thad shared the operator's response with Lark. She shook her head in frustration. "That's how Pike gets away with it. By the time they investigate, the evidence will be diluted or gone completely." "So what do we do?" "We keep building our case," Lark said firmly. "The more documentation we have, the harder it'll be for them to ignore it. I'm meeting with some EPA contacts next week. They might be able to fast-track things." The sun was setting as they packed up their equipment. Thad felt exposed in a way he hadn't before. Now that they'd confirmed Pike's involvement, the stakes seemed higher. Pike Haulage was a powerful company, and Everett Pike himself had a reputation for dealing harshly with opponents. "Be extra careful," Lark warned, as if reading his thoughts. "Pike probably has people watching this area. If they notice the grate—" "I know," Thad said quietly, "but we can't just let them keep poisoning the ground." Lark touched his arm briefly. "We won't, but we have to be smart about this. Document everything, keep your phone charged, and call me immediately if anything seems off." As Lark's truck disappeared down the road, Thad stood in his backyard with Hobbs, looking at the newly installed grate. It seemed simultaneously like a small victory and a declaration of war. Pike would notice soon enough. And then, Thad pushed the thought away. One step at a time. They had evidence now, and a clear connection to Pike's operation. The slow pace of official response was frustrating, but at least they were making progress. Hobbs nudged his hand, and Thad scratched the dog's ears absently. "At least we know what we're dealing with now, boy," he murmured, "and we're not facing it alone." The setting sun cast long shadows across his damaged yard, but for the first time, Thad felt like they had a real chance of stopping whoever was responsible. The evidence was mounting, and with Lark's help, they were finally ahead of the game instead of just reacting. He took one last look at the grate before heading inside. It wasn't much, but it was a start. More importantly, it was a sign that he wasn't going to back down, no matter what came next. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Hobbs's urgent barking jolted Thad awake. The deep, threatening growls were different from his usual morning alerts. Thad rushed to the window, his heart pounding. Through the early morning mist, he saw Hobbs standing rigid in the backyard, hackles raised, staring at something near the fence. "What is it, boy?" Thad called out, quickly pulling on his work boots. When he reached the yard, Hobbs was circling a chunk of meat that hadn't been there the night before. The dog's nose twitched, but he wouldn't go near it. Instead, he kept backing away, whining softly. Thad's stomach twisted as he examined the scene. Several pieces of raw hamburger meat were scattered along the fence line, deliberately thrown over from the other side. "Good boy," Thad whispered, patting Hobbs's head. "Smart boy for not touching it." Using a plastic bag as a glove, Thad carefully collected one of the meat pieces. The strong chemical smell burning his nostrils confirmed his worst fears. His hands shook with anger as he sealed the evidence in a clean plastic container. A pitiful whimper from the alley caught his attention. Hobbs's ears perked up, and they both moved toward the sound. Behind the fence, a small brown stray dog lay writhing in pain, foam bubbling from its mouth. Thad's heart sank as he recognized the dog. It often scrounged through neighborhood trash cans. "No, no, no," Thad muttered, fumbling for his phone to call Lark. But before he could dial, the stray's body went rigid, then still. Tears burned in Thad's eyes as he watched the innocent creature's life slip away, knowing it could have been Hobbs. Lark arrived 20 minutes later with her medical kit, but it was too late for the stray. She took samples from both the poisoned meat and the dead dog, promising to have them tested through her contacts at the animal hospital. "This is crossing a line," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're not just threatening property anymore, they're killing innocent animals." "They're sending a message," Thad replied grimly. "They want me to know what could happen to Hobbs." Later that afternoon, Thad attended the annual county fair, where Pike Haulage had a prominent booth promoting their environmentally conscious waste management solutions. The irony made him sick. Everett Pike himself stood there in an expensive suit, shaking hands with local officials and business owners. Fury rose in Thad's chest as he watched Pike's performance. The man's carefully cultivated image of respectability was a mask, hiding the monster who would poison innocent animals to protect his illegal operations. Before he could stop himself, Thad marched straight to the booth. "Mr. Pike," he called out, loud enough for nearby visitors to hear. "Care to explain why your trucks are dumping toxic waste through the culvert system at night?" The crowd around them grew quiet. Pike's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned cold as ice. "Young man, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Thad Merrick. Your illegal dumping is poisoning my property and killing animals in the neighborhood." Pike's expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained smooth as silk. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Merrick. one that could result in serious legal consequences if you continue to spread such harmful lies about our company. They're not lies. I have proof, photos, videos, samples of the contamination. Pike stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Thad could hear. Listen carefully, boy. Pike Haulage employs 3 of the best law firms in the state. We can bury you in litigation so deep, you'll lose your house just paying legal fees. Is that what you want? I want you to stop poisoning my neighborhood. I'd strongly advise you to reconsider your position, Pike said, his friendly mask slipping to reveal something darker. Legal battles can be very expensive, and accidents happen all the time to people who don't mind their own business. 2 security guards approached, clearly on Pike's payroll. Thad found himself being firmly escorted away from the booth, while Pike resumed his glad handing as if nothing had happened. The confrontation left Thad shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. Pike's threats weren't empty. He had the money and connections to make good on them. But backing down now would mean letting him continue his illegal dumping with impunity. That night, Thad worked the late shift at the grocery store, trying to process everything that had happened. His mind kept returning to the dead stray dog, to Pike's cold threats, to the seemingly impossible task ahead of him. It was nearly midnight when he finally headed home. The orange glow in his rearview mirror didn't register at first. Then Hobbs started barking frantically from the truck's passenger seat. Thad's blood ran cold as he realized what he was seeing. Flames were shooting up from the bed of his pickup. He slammed on the brakes and jumped out, pulling Hobbs with him. They barely made it clear before the fire reached the gas tank. The explosion lit up the quiet street like daylight, the heat intense enough to force them back several more steps. Fire trucks arrived quickly, but it was too late to save. Oh, the truck. Thad stood with Hobbs, watching his only vehicle burn while police officers took his statement. He knew exactly what had happened. Pike's warning had escalated from threats to action. The message was crystal clear. Back off, or next time it might not be just the truck. One of the firefighters approached him, helmet in hand. Found this wedged under what's left of the seat, he said, holding out a partially burned note. The message was simple. Final warning. Thad's hands trembled as he held the note. The reality of what he was up against hit him full force. Pike had virtually unlimited resources, political connections, and apparently no moral limits. How could one person stand against that kind of power? Hobbs pressed against his leg, offering silent support. Thad reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing strength from his faithful companion's presence. The dog had warned him about the danger from the very beginning, had refused the poisoned bait, had stayed by his side through everything. Looking at the smoking remains of his truck, Thad felt fear. Yes, but also a growing determination. Pike might have money and power on his side, but Thad had the truth. And he had something else Pike didn't. Nothing left to lose. A police officer approached with more questions, and Thad straightened his shoulders. He would file another report, gather more evidence, keep pushing for justice. Pike's intimidation tactics had only convinced him further that this fight was necessary. Someone had to stand up to the corruption, no matter the cost. The night air carried the acrid smell of burned metal and rubber as emergency vehicles began to leave the scene. Thad and Hobbs stood together in the empty street, watching the last embers die in the wreckage of his truck. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had survived. And that was enough. The morning after his truck burned, Thad sat at his kitchen table staring at the charred warning note. Hobbs lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to whine softly. The dog seemed to sense his owner's distress. A knock at the door made them both jump. Hobbs barked once, but his tail wagged when Lark's voice called out. "It's just me." Thad opened the door to find Lark carrying 2 large duffel bags. Her gray-green eyes were filled with concern as she took in his exhausted appearance. "I heard about your truck on the emergency dispatch. Are you okay?" "I'm still standing," Thad said, stepping aside to let her in. "But Pike's making it clear what happens to people who cross him." Lark set the bags on the kitchen table with a determined expression. "Then we need to make sure we get solid evidence before he can do worse. I brought some things that might help." She unzipped the first bag and began pulling out equipment: heavy-duty flashlights, rubber boots, protective coveralls, and respirator masks. "These are spare EMT gear. Not exactly standard issue for culvert exploration, but better than nothing." From the second bag, she produced a handheld device with a digital display. "This is an air quality monitor. We use it on hazmat calls. It can detect dangerous gas levels and chemical vapors." Thad picked up one of the respirators, turning it over in his hands. "You really think we need all this? Those barrels they're dumping could be leaking anything from industrial solvents to toxic waste. We're not taking chances." Lark's voice was firm. "I've seen what chemical exposure can do to people. Better safe than sorry." They spent the next hour checking and double-checking the equipment. Lark showed Thad how to properly fit the respirator mask and read the air monitor's display. They layered the protective gear over their clothes: thick coveralls, rubber boots, heavy gloves. "We look like we're ready to walk on the moon," Thad commented, trying to lighten the mood. "More like ready to wade through who knows what in Pike's private toxic waste dump," Lark replied. She checked her watch. "It's almost noon. The culvert will be easier to navigate in daylight, even if we need the flashlights." Thad nodded, then turned to Hobbs. "Stay here, boy. Guard the house." The dog whined but settled onto his bed, watching them with worried eyes. They walked to the back of Thad's property where the culvert entrance gaped like a dark mouth in the earth. The makeshift grate they'd installed earlier had slowed the flow of contaminated water, but hadn't stopped it completely. A thin stream still trickled past, carrying an oily sheen. Lark switched on the air monitor, holding it out in front of her. "Readings are elevated but not immediately dangerous. Still, keep your mask on." Thad clicked on his flashlight and aimed it into the tunnel. The beam revealed concrete walls stained with dark streaks and patches of something that might have been mold. The air coming from the opening felt unnaturally cold. "Ready?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lark nodded, her own flashlight joining his. "Stay close. The tunnel branches about 50 feet in, according to the municipal maps. We want the right fork. That's the one that leads toward Pike's property." They ducked into the culvert, boots splashing in the shallow water. The tunnel was tall enough to stand in, but they had to walk single file. Their flashlight beams bounced off the curved walls, creating shifting shadows that made every step feel uncertain. The air grew colder as they moved deeper. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each splash echoing ominously. Thad tried not to think about how many tons of earth pressed down above them, or what might happen if Pike's men chose this moment to dump more waste. They reached the fork Lark had mentioned. The left tunnel appeared largely dry, but the right one had the same contaminated stream they'd been following. As they turned that way, the air monitor in Lark's hand began beeping more frequently. "Chemical concentrations are rising," she reported, voice muffled by her mask. "We're definitely on the right track." The tunnel grew narrower as they pressed on. Their boots left deep impressions in a layer of slimy sediment that had accumulated on the bottom. The walls showed more signs of contamination, long streaks of discolored residue and crystalline formations that shouldn't have been there. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they spotted something ahead. Their flashlights revealed a pile of debris partially blocking the tunnel. As they got closer, Thad's heart rate spiked. They were looking at the remains of several crushed barrels. "This is it," he said, moving closer despite the danger. "This is proof that Pike's dumping industrial waste." Lark held him back with one hand. "Careful. Let me check the air first." She waved the monitor near the barrels. It emitted a series of sharp beeps. "These are definitely leaking something toxic. We need to document everything without touching it." They took turns holding flashlights while the other person photographed the scene with their phones. They captured images of serial numbers on the barrel fragments, close-ups of the chemical residue, and wider shots showing the location in the tunnel. "Look at this," Lark said, pointing her light at a section of wall. "There's a maintenance access panel. According to the maps, this should be right under that old orchard shed." Thad studied the rusty metal panel. "So that's how they're getting the barrels down here. They're dropping them through the shed floor." A sudden echoing clang from somewhere ahead made them both freeze. Lark quickly switched off her flashlight, and Thad followed suit. They stood in total darkness, hardly daring to breathe. Another metallic sound reached them, closer this time. Then voices, muffled but growing clearer. "Pike wants this section cleared," a man was saying. "Can't leave evidence lying around." Lark grabbed Thad's arm. "We need to go, now!" They turned and moved as quickly as they dared back the way they'd come, trying to keep their splashing footsteps quiet. The voices behind them grew louder, accompanied by the sound of metal scraping on concrete. "Did you hear something?" one of the voices asked. Thad and Lark pressed themselves against the tunnel wall, holding perfectly still. Their flashlights remained off, but they could see a beam of light playing across the curved ceiling ahead of them. "Probably just rats," another voice answered. "Let's get these barrels moved before the boss starts asking questions." They waited until the voices faded before continuing their retreat. The journey back seemed to take twice as long, every step carrying the fear of discovery. Finally, they saw gray daylight ahead and emerged into Thad's backyard, breathing hard despite their masks. Hobbs was waiting by the culvert entrance. He barked once in greeting, then growled at their contaminated coveralls. "Smart dog," Lark said as they carefully removed their protective gear. "We need to bag all this for proper disposal, and we should both get cleaned up before handling anything else." Thad nodded, still trying to process what they'd found. "Those photos have to be enough to convince someone. The EPA, the State Environmental Agency, somebody." "They will be," Lark assured him. "Pike can't ignore physical evidence like this. We just have to make sure it gets to the right people before he can cover it up." They spent the next hour documenting everything they'd seen, writing detailed notes while it was fresh in their minds. Thad couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. Pike's men were already destroying evidence. How long before all trace of the illegal dumping disappeared? But they had proof now. Real, undeniable proof. And Pike's attempts to silence him had only made Thad more determined to see justice done, no matter what it took. As they examined the tunnel walls more carefully, Thad's flashlight beam caught something metallic glinting through the grime. He stepped closer, wiping away years of buildup with his gloved hand. "Lark, look at this," he called out, his voice echoing in the confined space. A large pipe manifold was mounted to the wall, its brass fittings dulled by time and chemicals. Several valves branched off in different directions, but what made Thad's blood run cold was a small metal plate attached to the central junction. Through the corrosion, he could make out a series of stamped numbers. "That's impossible," he whispered, his hands shaking as he cleaned the plate further. "What is it?" Lark moved closer, holding her light steady on the fitting. "This number, 7438-2B. It's my mother's original deed number. I remember it from when she first bought the house." Thad's voice cracked with disbelief. This valve system, it's designed to direct flow onto my property. Lark studied the pipe configuration. These other branches look newer. See how the metal's different? She traced the paths with her light. They've modified the original drainage to feed into your yard. The reality of what they were seeing hit Thad like a physical blow. They're not just dumping chemicals randomly, they've engineered it to make it look like it's coming from my property. His mind raced through the implications. That's why Dorn dismissed my complaint so quickly. He knew exactly what was happening because he helped set it up. We need to check the county records, Lark said, already taking photos of the manifold and plate. If they modified these drainage lines, there should be permits filed. Thad felt sick. Unless those were forged too. They documented everything about the manifold, its location, the connection points, every identifying mark they could find. The air monitor continued its steady warning beep, reminding them they couldn't stay much longer. Back at ground level, they carefully decontaminated their gear. Thad's hands were trembling as he peeled off his gloves. The magnitude of what they'd discovered was overwhelming. It wasn't just criminal negligence or greed. It was a calculated conspiracy to destroy him. I can access the county database through my work credentials, Lark offered, her face still flushed from the protective mask. Emergency Services has limited access to property records for response planning. They set up Lark's laptop on Thad's kitchen table. Hobbs lay at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to whine softly, as if sensing their tension. The county website loaded slowly, its outdated interface crawling through searches. Here, Lark said after several minutes. Drainage modification permits for this area. Look at these dates. The screen showed a series of documents, all bearing Clive Dorn's signature. The modifications to the culvert system had been approved in stages over the past year, each one carefully structured to appear legitimate. He backdated everything, Thad noted, pointing to inconsistencies in the filing sequence. These permits show work being done before Pike even bought the adjacent property. Lark pulled up another record. And here's the killer. This approval links the contamination pathway directly to your deed number. If anyone investigates, the paper trail leads straight to you. Thad slumped in his chair, the weight of discovery pressing down on him. They've thought of everything. Pike provides the chemicals, Dorn handles the paperwork, and I take the fall when it all comes out. But they didn't count on us finding the manifold, Lark countered, her voice fierce with determination. We have proof of tampering, proof of forged documents. This isn't just environmental crime anymore, it's conspiracy and fraud. They spent the next hour downloading and saving copies of every relevant document, storing them in multiple secure locations. If Dorn realized they'd accessed the records, the originals might mysteriously disappear. We need to be careful how we use this, Lark warned as she closed her laptop. Pike and Dorn will do anything to keep this quiet. Now we know why they've been so aggressive. They're not just protecting a dumping operation, they're covering up a frame job. Thad nodded, thinking of his burned truck and the poisoned bait that had killed the stray dog. They're getting desperate. This was supposed to be their insurance policy, pin everything on me if they got caught. Now that we know about it, we document everything, Lark said firmly. Every piece of evidence, every connection. We build a case they can't ignore or destroy. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're not alone in this anymore, Thad. We'll expose them together. Hobbs got up and pressed against Thad's leg, offering silent support. Looking down at his faithful companion, Thad felt a surge of gratitude. If Hobbs hadn't refused his food that first night, hadn't warned him something was wrong, none of this would have come to light. The manifold valve was their smoking gun, the physical proof of a conspiracy that went beyond simple greed. Pike and Dorn had tried to destroy Thad's life, to make him the scapegoat for their crimes. But in doing so, They'd given him and Lark the evidence needed to bring them down. They spent the rest of the evening organizing their findings, creating backup copies and secure storage for everything they'd discovered. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air, but with it came a sense of purpose. They had unraveled the scheme. Now they had to make sure justice was served. Thad paced his kitchen, still processing the magnitude of their discovery. Every few steps, he glanced at the printed documents spread across his table, damning evidence of Pike's elaborate scheme. Hobbs watched him from his bed in the corner, head tilted in concern at his owner's agitation. "We can't just take this to the authorities," Thad said, running his hands through his hair. "Pike's got too many connections. He'll bury it before anyone important sees it." Lark sat at the table, her EMT jacket draped over the chair back, tapping a pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "You're right. We need something they can't ignore or explain away. Something public." "What about catching them in the act?" Thad stopped pacing, the beginnings of a plan forming. "We know they're using that manifold. If we could document them actually dumping..." Lark straightened in her chair, her gray-green eyes brightening. "We'd need solid evidence, multiple angles, clear identification of the trucks and workers." "I've got 2 trail cameras from when I used to hunt," Thad said. "They're infrared, weather-resistant. We could position them near the manifold." "That's a start." Lark began writing rapidly. "But we need more. If we block the downstream flow somehow, it would force any dumping to back up. Make it obvious what they're doing." Thad leaned over her shoulder, studying her notes. "I've got some expanding foam sealant in the garage. If we spray it into the right spots downstream, it would create a temporary dam." "Perfect." Lark's pen moved faster. "And I know someone who might help. State Trooper Marcus Chen. He worked a multi-car pileup with me last year. He's straight as they come, won't be in Pike's pocket." They spent the next hour planning, marking locations on a rough sketch of the culvert system. The risk was enormous, if Pike's men discovered them setting up the trap, or if the evidence wasn't conclusive enough. "We'll need to time this perfectly," Lark said, checking her watch. "Based on their pattern, they usually dump between 2 and 4 in the morning. Less chance of witnesses." Thad nodded, studying their plan. "We should set everything up tonight, well before they arrive. The cameras need time to settle, and we want any disturbed ground to look natural." "I'll contact Marcus," Lark said, pulling out her phone. "He works nights. I'll tell him to be ready but keep his distance until we signal. We don't want any patrol cars spooking them." While Lark stepped outside to make her call, Thad gathered their supplies. He found the trail cameras in his garage, checking their batteries and memory cards. The foam sealant was there too, along with some heavy-duty trash bags they could use to protect their equipment from the toxic waste. Hobbs followed him around, whining softly. Thad paused to scratch behind his ears. "It's okay, boy. We're going to fix this. No more poison in our yard." Lark returned, looking satisfied. "Marcus is in. He'll park his cruiser half a mile away and wait for my signal. Said he can have backup here in 5 minutes once we give the word." They waited until full dark before moving their supplies to the culvert entrance. The night was cool and still, perfect for sound to carry. They would have to be extremely careful. "Here," Lark said, handing Thad a small radio. "Emergency band. 3 clicks means trouble. Get out fast. 2 clicks means the trap is sprung. Call in Marcus." Thad clipped the radio to his belt, its weight reassuring. They were no longer just gathering evidence. They were actively fighting back. Working in near-total darkness, they positioned the first camera high in a twisted oak tree, its lens aimed perfectly at the manifold access point. The second camera they mounted lower, focusing on the approach path the trucks would have to take. "Check the angles," Thad whispered, using his phone to connect to the camera's wireless feeds. The infrared images were clear, showing the culvert entrance in ghostly green detail. Lark guided him deeper into the tunnel, both of them wearing protective masks and gloves. The air monitor beeped softly, warning of the lingering toxins. They moved carefully to their chosen checkpoint, where the tunnel branched into 3 smaller passages. "This is the choke point," Lark said, her voice muffled by the mask. "Block these 2 branches and everything will back up toward the manifold." Thad worked quickly with the foam sealant, building thick barriers that would hold against the initial pressure but dissolve over time, leaving no permanent evidence. The chemical smell of the foam mixed with the toxic stench of the tunnel, making him grateful for the mask. Back outside, they double-checked every element of their trap. The cameras were well hidden, their infrared lights disabled to prevent detection. The foam barriers were set. Their phones were charged, and the radios tested. "Now we wait," Lark said, settling into their observation point, a dense cluster of bushes with a clear view of the culvert entrance. She checked her watch. 2 hours until their usual window. Thad sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth in the cool night air. Hobbs lay at their feet, his presence both comfort and early warning system. The dog's ears would catch any approach long before human senses could. "Thank you," Thad said, softly. "For believing me, for helping. Most people would have walked away." Lark turned to him, her face barely visible in the darkness. "I've seen what people like Pike do to communities, how they hurt people who can't fight back. Someone has to stand up to them." They fell into comfortable silence, watching and waiting. Occasionally, Hobbs would lift his head at distant sounds, raccoons in the trees, a car on the far street, but always settled back down. At 2:15 in the morning, the dog's ears pricked up and stayed that way. Minutes later, they heard the low rumble of diesel engines approaching slowly, with no headlights. "Here we go," Lark breathed, readying her phone to record. 2 large trucks backed carefully toward the culvert entrance, their movements practiced and precise. Men in dark clothing emerged, quickly setting up portable lights and unfolding a flexible hose system. Through his phone's connection to the trail cameras, Thad could see every detail. The company logo hastily covered with magnetic panels, the workers' faces clear in the infrared light, the barrels being connected to the hose. They had positioned themselves perfectly. When the dumping began, the blocked passages would force the waste back up through the manifold. The evidence would be undeniable. Lark's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing once. They were committed now. Their trap was set, their evidence mounting. All they needed was for Pike's men to incriminate themselves completely. The next few minutes would determine everything: success or failure, justice or defeat. Thad watched through the camera feed as the first barrel was positioned, his heart pounding with equal measures of fear and determination. They had one chance to get this right. Everything they had discovered, every piece of evidence they had gathered, led to this moment. The manifold that proved the conspiracy, the forged permits that showed the corruption, and now, finally, the chance to catch Pike's operation in the act. Beside him, Lark held her phone steady, documenting every movement. Above them, the trail cameras recorded silently, gathering irrefutable proof. And somewhere in the darkness, Trooper Chen waited for their signal, ready to move in and make the arrests that would bring Pike's empire crashing down. The digital numbers on Thad's watch glowed 2 o'clock in the morning as the first rumble of diesel engines broke the night's silence. Hobbs's ears perked up, his body tensing as he sensed the approaching threat. Lark shifted closer to Thad in their hiding spot, both of them hardly daring to breathe. 2 massive trucks emerged from the darkness, their headlights extinguished as they backed slowly toward the culvert entrance. The vehicle's brake lights cast an eerie red glow across the scene. Through his night vision-enabled phone screen, Thad watched the infrared camera feed as several dark figures emerged from the trucks. "That's Rogan Bale," Thad whispered, recognizing Pike's foreman as the man stepped into view. The scar on Bale's cheek was clearly visible in the infrared footage. The foreman moved with practiced efficiency, directing his crew to set up portable floodlights and unroll heavy industrial hoses. Lark's hand tightened on Thad's arm. "We've got them," she breathed, her phone steady as she recorded the scene. Every single one of them. The hidden cameras captured crystal-clear footage as Bale accessed the manifold control panel. The foreman's movements were confident, showing his familiarity with the illegal setup. He checked a notebook, adjusting valves with precise turns. Thad's heart pounded as he watched the crew connect the hoses to large drums marked with hazard symbols. The blocked passages they had created would force any dumped waste to back up, providing undeniable evidence of Pike's operation. "Come on," Lark murmured, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. "Just a little more." Bale gave a sharp hand signal, and one of his men started the pump. The hose grew rigid as toxic waste began flowing into the culvert system. Through the camera feed, Thad could see the liquid hitting their barrier, starting to pool exactly as they had planned. Suddenly, the night exploded with light and sound. Red and blue emergency lights strobed across the trees as a state patrol car rounded the corner, siren wailing. Trooper Chen had timed her arrival perfectly. "Police, everyone freeze!" The trooper's voice boomed through her car's speaker system. "Step away from the equipment and put your hands where I can see them." The scene erupted into chaos. Some workers tried to run, while others stood frozen in the glare of the patrol car's spotlight. Bale's face contorted with rage as he realized they'd been caught. He lunged for the control panel, perhaps hoping to hide evidence, but it was too late. 2 more patrol cars arrived, their sirens adding to the cacophony. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, quickly surrounding the area. Thad and Lark stood up from their hiding spot, still recording everything. "We did it," Thad said, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time since discovering the contamination in his yard, he felt real hope. The weight of weeks of fear and frustration began to lift from his shoulders. Trooper Chen approached them, her expression professional but pleased. "Good work, both of you. The cameras caught everything?" "Everything," Lark confirmed, sending the footage to the officer's phone. "The manifold, the forged permits, the dumping, it's all documented." They watched as officers handcuffed Bale and his crew. The foreman's face was twisted with fury as he was led to a patrol car. He caught sight of Thad and spat on the ground, but his intimidation carried no power now. Evidence technicians arrived, photographing the scene and taking samples from the backed-up waste. The portable lights Pike's crew had set up now illuminated their own crimes, casting harsh shadows across the damning scene. Thad knelt to scratch Hobbs behind the ears, his faithful companion who had first alerted him to the danger. "Good boy," he whispered. "You knew all along, didn't you?" More police vehicles arrived, including an environmental crimes unit van. The scale of the response showed how seriously authorities were taking the situation. Each piece of evidence they collected strengthened the case against Pike and his operation. For now, at least, they had won. Pike's illegal dumping operation was exposed, his crew caught in the act. The cameras had captured irrefutable proof, and multiple law enforcement agencies were involved. The truth Thad had fought so hard to uncover was finally coming to light. As Thad watched officers leading away the last of Pike's crew, he felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a lingering wariness. He knew this victory, while significant, was just the beginning. Pike wouldn't go down without a fight. But standing there in the flashing lights, with Lark beside him and Hobbs at his feet, Thad allowed himself to savor this moment. His quiet determination had paid off. His home and his community were one step closer to being safe from Pike's toxic operations. The moment of triumph shattered like glass. Rogan Bale, despite being handcuffed, launched himself toward the control panel with unexpected speed. His shoulder slammed into the manifold with brutal force. The sound of metal tearing filled the air as the blockage they'd installed ripped free. "No!" Thad shouted, but it was too late. A toxic wave surged through the culvert system. The backed-up chemicals, now free from restraint, rushed forward with terrifying force. Noxious fumes billowed out as the contaminated liquid found new paths through the underground network. Lark grabbed Thad's arm. "There's someone down there." Her flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement deeper in the tunnel. Without hesitation, Thad plunged back into the culvert. The air grew thick with chemical vapors that burned his throat. His protective gear, borrowed from Lark's EMT supplies, offered limited protection against the caustic fumes. Behind him, Hobbs's desperate howls echoed from the culvert entrance. The dog paced frantically, refusing to retreat despite the danger. His barks became more urgent, as if trying to guide them back to safety. "Hello?" Thad called out, fighting against the burning in his lungs. "Is someone there?" A weak cough answered him. In the beam of his flashlight, he spotted a young man pressed against the tunnel wall, Coulter Vance, Pike's nephew. The boy's face was pale with fear and chemical exposure. "Help!" Coulter gasped. "Uncle Everett. He made me watch the operation. I didn't want to." The toxic liquid was rising fast, already ankle-deep. Lark splashed through it to reach them, her EMT training taking over. "We need to get him out now. These fumes could kill him." Thad wrapped one arm around Coulter's waist. The teenager was barely conscious, his legs buckling beneath him. The caustic waste sloshed around their feet, eating through their protective boots. "Stay with us, kid," Thad urged as they began their desperate retreat. The tunnel seemed endless, each step a battle against the rising chemical tide. Lark supported Coulter's other side, her breathing labored through her mask. "The fumes are too strong. We need to move faster." Above them, they could hear shouting and chaos. Hobbs's barks grew more frantic, a beacon guiding them toward the exit. The dog refused to abandon them, even as other first responders pulled back from the dangerous gases. The liquid waste now reached their knees, its acrid stench overwhelming their protective gear. Coulter stumbled, nearly dragging them down into the toxic flow. Thad's muscles screamed as he tightened his grip, refusing to let the boy fall. "Almost there," he gasped, though his vision was starting to blur. The exit seemed to waver like a mirage, growing further away instead of closer. Lark's voice came in ragged bursts. "Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't." A surge of contaminated water hit them from behind, knocking them off balance. Thad's shoulder slammed into the tunnel wall. Pain shot through his arm, but he maintained his grip on Coulter. The teenager had gone limp, dead weight in their arms. Hobbs's barking suddenly sounded closer. The dog had defied all attempts to restrain him, positioning himself at the very edge of the culvert entrance. His amber eyes glowed in the emergency lights as he urged them on. "There!" Lark pointed toward the exit, where emergency responders were setting up extraction equipment. "Just a few more steps." Thad's legs felt like lead, each movement a supreme effort. The toxic waste swirled around their thighs now, eating through their protective clothing. His lungs burned with every breath, and black spots danced at the edges of his vision. But he wouldn't let go. Not of Coulter, not of Lark, not of hope itself. With one final surge of desperate strength, They pushed toward the exit. Hobbs's encouraging barks mixed with the shouts of rescue workers reaching down to help them. Strong hands grabbed them, pulling them up and out of the flooded culvert. They collapsed onto solid ground as hazmat teams rushed forward with decontamination equipment. Through the haze of exhaustion and chemical exposure, Thad saw Rogan Bale being forced into a police car, his face twisted with thwarted rage. Hobbs pressed against Thad's side, whimpering softly as emergency workers began treating them. The dog's fur was wet from the decontamination spray, but he refused to leave his master's side. Coulter was quickly loaded into an ambulance, oxygen mask strapped to his face. "You're insane," Lark whispered hoarsely from where she lay next to him, managing a weak smile despite her obvious pain. "Completely insane." Thad couldn't answer. His throat felt scorched, and his eyes stung fiercely. But he had done what needed to be done. They had survived, and they had saved Coulter, another victim of Pike's ruthless operation. Clinging desperately to the metal rungs embedded in the culvert wall, Thad helped Lark position Coulter more securely above the rising chemical tide. The teenager's arm was bleeding where he'd scraped it against the rough concrete, and his eyes were wide with terror. "Hold still," Lark commanded, her paramedic training evident as she pressed a clean bandage from her kit against the wound. "We need to stop this bleeding before the chemicals get into it." Coulter's whole body trembled. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "Uncle Everett? He made me help. Said it was family loyalty, but I knew it was wrong." "Tell us everything," Thad urged, maintaining his grip on both the rung and Coulter's good arm. Below them, the toxic waste churned ominously. "The whole operation," Coulter gasped, wincing as Lark secured the bandage. "Uncle Everett's been dumping here for months, but when you started asking questions, he got scared. That's when he brought in Mr. Dorn." "The code director?" Lark asked, though they all knew the answer. Coulter nodded miserably. "Dorn forged all the permits. Made it look like the contamination was coming from your property, Mr. Merrick. They planned to blame you when the state investigators finally showed up. Uncle Everett said no one would believe a Night Stalker over a business owner anyway." Despite his exhaustion and the burning in his lungs, Thad felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Here, finally, was the proof they needed, straight from inside Pike's operation. The truth that would bring down both Pike and Dorn, exposed by Pike's own flesh and blood. Through the toxic haze, Thad could hear Hobbs's desperate barking echoing down the culvert. The sound was like a lifeline, guiding him back toward the manifold valve that was releasing the chemical surge. "I'm going back," he shouted to Lark, his voice hoarse from the fumes. "Take this." Lark quickly unspooled a rope from her emergency kit, tying it securely around his waist. "Don't you dare let go of it." The acrid chemicals burned his eyes as he pushed through the murky flow. His boots slipped on the slick concrete, but Hobbs's continuous barking drew him forward like a beacon. 20 feet felt like a mile as he fought against the current. Finally, his hands found the manifold. The metal was slick with chemicals, and the valve resisted his first attempt to turn it. Gritting his teeth, Thad threw his whole weight against it. The rough edges bit deep into his palm, tearing skin, but he refused to let go. With a grinding screech, the valve began to turn. Above ground, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as state troopers converged on Pike's storage shed. They caught Pike and Dorn red-handed, frantically shredding permit documents and deleting computer files. The look of shock on Pike's face when the cuffs went on told its own story. His empire was crumbling in real time. The chemical flow slowly subsided as Thad finally managed to seal the valve completely. His injured hand throbbed, but the victory was worth every drop of blood. Through quick thinking and raw determination, He'd managed to stop Pike's final desperate attack from claiming any lives. Back at the surface, red and blue lights flashed across the night as police cruisers surrounded Pike's property. Officers led Pike, Dorn, and Rogan away in handcuffs, their faces a mixture of rage and defeat. Pike's usual smugness had vanished, replaced by a sickly pallor as he watched his carefully constructed scheme collapse. "You'll want to see this, sir," one trooper called out, waving a laptop displaying Thad's footage. The crystal-clear video showed Pike's men dumping chemicals, while Coulter's tearful testimony, recorded right there at the scene, filled in every damning detail of the operation. "My uncle made me help," Coulter explained, his voice shaking. "He said he'd cut off my college money if I didn't. But I can't keep quiet anymore, not after tonight." Word spread quickly through the community. Local news vans arrived, their reporters eager to interview the man who'd exposed the environmental crime. Thad stepped back from the cameras, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. Lark gently cleaned and bandaged his injured hand, her touch careful but sure. "Not anyone would have risked their life like that," she countered softly. "You're a hero, whether you like it or not." Hobbs pressed against Thad's leg, tail wagging slowly. The dog's keen instincts had started it all, his refusal to eat, his warnings about the yard. Thad scratched behind his faithful companion's ears. "Good boy," he whispered. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Local residents gathered at the scene, offering words of thanks and praise. Through it all, Thad remained humble, more relieved that justice had been served than proud of his role in making it happen. In the days that followed Pike's arrest, Thad focused on healing both the land and himself. His splinted hand made the work challenging, but he was determined. Standing in his backyard, he surveyed the area where the culvert had been permanently sealed with concrete, now just a memory beneath the soil. "The sugar maples should do well here," Lark said, holding a slender sapling steady while Thad carefully packed soil around its roots. Her gray-green eyes sparkled with pride as she watched him work. Nature has an amazing way of bouncing back. Hobbs lounged in a patch of sunshine nearby, his food bowl finally empty for the first time in weeks. The big dog's tail thumped contentedly against the grass as he watched his humans work together. The trust in his amber eyes seemed to say, "I told you so." "You know," Thad said, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead with his good hand, "I never thought I'd be grateful for a dog refusing his dinner." But Hobbs knew something was wrong before any of us. Lark smiled, reaching over to squeeze his uninjured hand. "Sometimes the best partnerships start in the strangest ways." Her words carried meaning beyond just Hobbs's role in uncovering Pike's scheme. Together they planted 3 more saplings, each one a promise of renewal. Where poison had once seeped, new life would grow. Their shared experience had forged something deeper than friendship, a bond built on trust, courage, and the determination to stand up for what was right. The young trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves catching the sunlight. Like the seedlings taking root in restored soil, Thad and Lark's relationship had grown from uncertainty into something strong and vital. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.